Hello, and welcome back to the Sekimeiya Spun Glass. We're starting off another episode by leaving a cafe with Shirya. Let's see where we're going. Letting the time pass was what I most and least wanted. I stayed there glancing out and believing it was the best way to use the time I still had. Well, we're not leaving yet actually, I forgot. Daffy must have noticed that, as he didn't resume the conversation once the silence had returned. There was nothing else I thought I could do on December 3rd. The only thing that remained was going to the tower and learning what would come next. Before that, there was only an optional step. It was deciding. I still had the ability to choose. It wasn't true that going to the tower was essential for that. No matter what I'd find there, deciding whether to change the past or not was possible, even though I'd done my best to believe that I'd never choose the latter. After all, I touched the Sekimeiya to change the past, and it would have been for nothing if I later decided not to. But perhaps that was wrong. I couldn't think anymore that touching the Sekimeiya would have been for nothing even if I decided not to alter history. The days I was living through did mean something to me. What would actually happen if I step aside and choose not to go to the tower again? I don't think that would actually be so simple either. Late on the 15th, I disappeared from the tower, leaving the others behind. If everything happens as it did, Atsuki will try to travel to the past himself. The mystery of the recording will come back in full force. There really wasn't a single good option, so maybe deciding simply wasn't possible. Instead of trying to determine which of the choices I had was better, would attempting to find a new one serve any purpose? There's just nothing else, is there? It had always been a concealed alternative that I'd been aware of, but it was so unthinkable that I'd chosen to immediately dismiss it. If I didn't change the past, Mia would stay dead, and so would the people who died in the tower. It was even possible Atsuki would too if the exit didn't open after 12 hours. At that point, I could try to enter the building through the storeroom or make the police do so, but if that door didn't actually lead outside, the recording had a chance to occur a month later. Even though I'd changed the past by calling my mother, that wouldn't necessarily prevent the events of the 15th from occurring. The version of me in the hospital at that moment could still travel back in time the same way I had. I knew that could have been wrong. If, after waking up in the hospital, my mom told me she'd received my calls days prior, even if I ended up traveling in the tower, I wouldn't try to change the past by calling her. The distinction between that Shirya and me already somewhat existed. So if that's not the case, and I further change the past, the only negative is that the self of mine currently in the hospital will stop being me, and I'll have to abandon my current life. I'm not really sure I could do that. Then yes, of course, there was a way to prevent that from happening. Upon changing the past, the problematic variable was solely the other version of myself. Therefore, by removing that variable, I'd be in an ideal world. Alright, now what's your plan? But that wasn't something I could seriously consider. That possibility simply didn't exist. I spent a very long time beside that glass as it was marked by unending snow. I was getting alarmingly hungry, but for as long as I stayed there, I would be fine. Through the glass and the whorls of white, I was able to see the sun. That meant it had reached the center of the sky. I continued staring through it, watching the part of Yashibana that had become as lively as always. That was until I recognized something in the distance. I stood up from the chair, realizing that I'd forgotten something. I'll be leaving. How much is it? What? You still think that you have to pay? Just tell me, I'll feel bad about coming so often if I don't pay. That's mean. It's 300 yen. I took my wallet out and paid with the exact amount. Thank you. Sorry for leaving so suddenly, but I need to be somewhere. Don't worry, you know you can come back anytime. I nodded and walked through the door, flipping up my hood. I walked directly to Ramon Street. In the distance I'd recognized a purse. After staring at it for a few seconds, I knew exactly where I'd seen it. I dashed toward the direction I'd seen it. Right above the purse, an umbrella had covered the face of its owner. But that didn't matter. I knew whose purse that had been. While identical ones could exist, I'd recognized it as Isla's. I ran to the street the umbrella had turned to. Even though I hadn't seen the face of the person holding it, that umbrella had been lower to the ground than all the others. I started moving faster as I reached an area with less snow stuck to the pavement. Ramon was pretty crowded, so I wasn't sure if anyone had been walking beside that umbrella, but I'd recalled something else I'd entirely forgotten about. Isla's friend. That's right. They must be here. I've also forgotten about that. A sudden wave of numbness crashed through my head, demanding me to eat something and slow down, but I didn't stop until I'd arrived at the dimmest street I'd seen the umbrella at. I couldn't see anyone. There were multiple doors on both sides and more branching paths farther ahead. I don't know what happened to me this morning, but today's definitely a school day. If that was really Isla, it could have actually been her friend, right? Was I correct and her identity was Isla herself? That thought had seemed a little strange in the tower for a number of reasons. She couldn't have gone back in time to repeat exactly what she'd lived, but I had since learned that at any point such a long travel could have happened without the need for storing energy for a month. Oh. I looked down. From there onwards, snow still covered the ground. As a result, I was able to see a pair of footprints, smaller and less faded than the rest, disappearing ahead. I stepped forward, careful not to lose track of them. The buildings weren't casting dark shadows on the ground, so I was able to follow them without mixing them up. I went all the way down the street, where the footprints turned to the right. Once again, I was close to Atsuki's house, but the marks on the ground deviated from it. There was still no indication of them ending, and I wasn't able to see anyone further ahead. I'd been trying to go fast, but once again the footprints turned to the right and I couldn't spot the umbrella. Isn't this a dead end? I like that music. Like I thought, that turn brought me to a short street filled with houses. That meant the footprints had to end at a door. And they did. When I lifted my head, I saw a house, the trail ending at its entrance. Does Isla live here? Should I ring the bell? Instead, I warily stepped back, as letting myself be seen had some worrying implications. Even if I'd just seen an Isla who travelled from the future, while the original one was likely to not be home, it was very possible Erina was. She told us that she'd once found out Isla hadn't gone to school, which meant that she could have been inside right then. Whether I ring the bell or not, that's the same as finally deciding whether to change the past or not. I'd like to know who Isla's friend is, and if it really is herself, I might learn something very important from her. However, it's also possible Erina will see me, which will change things pretty drastically. I looked at the building from behind a car. I couldn't see light through any of the windows and nobody else was close by. I needed to make up my mind, but it was impossible. If I pressed the button next to the door, the rest of my life might have gone up in smoke. Is it true that the past will only change if I want it to? If so, I could try to ring without that being my intention, but that's so risky. I don't know how it works. I felt my heart racing as I worried about making any rushed action. Do I just watch from here and try to observe who the friend is? Maybe I should just leave. I know where Isla lives now, so I can try to prevent them from going to the tower on the 15th. That really might be best. If I were to do that and Isla's friend is really herself, she'd end up in the same situation as me, stuck in a world with two versions of her. What will happen after that? How would the world even take it? If they don't go to the tower, Isla won't be able to travel to the past. Will that simply not matter and both of them will continue to live? If upon changing the past her existence is overwritten, mine will be too, right? How was I supposed to reason any of that out when I knew nothing about what would happen? Time was passing with no progress being made. Every time I questioned what to do, the same fundamental bifurcation emerged. I needed to know what I wanted. Can I not do it? Is it actually impossible to decide? It shouldn't be, right? Even if I don't like any of the choices, there has to be one I prefer. If they're all equally bad, then I can just choose one to stick to, can't I? I can just decide my entire life like that. I need to do it. though, and this is when. I'm stretching out the time I have too much, and I could end up immensely regretting it at any point. I just have to decide now. Even if I wish I'd made another choice later, I can't know that now, so I just need to make the decision based on what I feel at this moment. But even after thinking all that, I didn't move from behind the car. My thoughts were in complete disarray. I finally stepped out and inspected the dark windows. If I didn't care about changing the past again, trying to reach Isla's friend was the right call. But of course I cared. I couldn't suddenly press a button that would influence my whole life. I looked at the way I'd come from. Nobody was there. I could see my footprints coming toward me, so I quietly traced them, peeking at the previous street. Again, nobody was in sight. I'd felt the same sensation as the day before. I didn't know if I'd noticed a sound or a movement, but my head had suddenly turned to that corner. I looked at the ground, but many footprints were there, and due to the falling snow, it was hard to tell which were recent. Is it really just me? It's not, right? Yesterday someone was really following me. Did I only imagine it this time? I looked left and right, confirming I was alone. I still felt that Waisude might have been who'd followed me, but he wouldn't do it again. Could it be Isla? No, the footprints I saw yesterday belonged to an adult. I tried to compose myself and walked further into the street. I should just leave. I'm not going to be able to ring the bell. I felt really uneasy thinking that someone might have been watching me from a distance. I couldn't understand why someone would have been, and it put even more pressure on me. I was still very hungry and far from my apartment, but if I went home in a straight line, I'd have to go through all the deserted streets before getting back to the center. I didn't want to do that if someone was observing me in secret. I was close to the outskirts, so instead of going back, I kept on ahead. When the curved street came to an end and the short houses stopped, the sight to the tall mountains was wide open. I was at the start of the mountain range, close to the valley that led out of Yushibana. Alright, you know what? Last time the decision to go straight home was bad. The decision to go into the empty forest is worse. I hadn't seen anyone yet, and there were barely any footprints around. If I'd been followed again, I must have gone the opposite way. I spun in place, confirming again that nobody was there. I doubted anyone was watching me based on where I was. The only place they could be hiding was within some covered windows fairly far away. Noticing the slight weight on my head, I shook off the snow piled on it. Then I kept walking, my boots sinking deeply into the snow. The path outlining Yushibana was not well maintained. Tall weeds dominated it, unfazed by the snow. I learned to avoid coming back from Atsuki's house through that route, as it tended to be hard to traverse. Ahead of me, I saw a thin path going up the mountain. Like the entire hill, it was coated in snow, but the lack of grass peeking up highlighted the way. I reached the split and instinctively took the path up the large mountain. Due to another impulse, I found myself climbing the steep path, leaving behind the straight and plain one. I knew it would level out soon and lead home despite taking longer. All around me, I could only see dried bushes covered in white and tall trees scattered around. I knew the mountains were frequently visited, but I couldn't make out any indications of people having been there. I turned to that path due to the conversation I'd had with Atsuki in one of the hallway A crystal rooms. It had been so long since both of us had taken that path, but walking up all by myself was still somehow familiar. Would we ever go up together again? That was also something I had to choose. The wind was noticeably stronger higher up. The terrain there was plain and the way branched out. Higher still was the entrance to the caves, whereas the path to the right would take me close to home. I turned around to witness the sight I'd earned. The entirety of Yushibana was covered by snow. The sight was as pleasant as it has always been, intensified by the moving curtain of falling flakes, which appeared much denser from above. I looked at the way I'd come from, but even from that position I wasn't able to see anyone. Only when I peered at the center of town was I able to notice the tiny movements of people on the streets. There wasn't a place I couldn't see. The hospital was close to where I was, most of its windows covered from within. In the distance, the Zoobs Out's trash disposal looked like a perfect circle, appearing as elegant as every other place thanks to the snow. And of course, close to it, Ashia Tower. It was rare to see the top of it, but the snow almost made it blend in completely. I looked down to its entrance. I could just barely make it out, despite the distance and whirls of snow, but there was no shutter in place. Despite the harsh wind hitting my face, I kept watching with both hands in my pockets, trying not to let the snow fall inside. A very important decision still needed to be made, and even ignoring that decision was its own decision. Was there going to be a better time? As soon as I asked myself that, I knew the answer. Would I try to alter the fate of the town, trapped in a shrouded sequence of events revolving around a magical gemstone? Would I try to save Mia and the people I'd met that day at the cost of my own normal life? Even if I succeeded, I would have to keep on living in circumstances I couldn't even fathom. I'd felt like I'd been living in a mire, and when I was finally pulled out of it, I lost everything. The incident in the tower had only made things worse, and I'd finally been saved from it only to be subsequently forced into destroying things for myself as the right answer. I didn't know if I could accomplish it, but the choice was about whether to try it. I could be caught by the police or be beaten to the punch by someone else from the future. If the latter happened, I was letting it happen by not acting. It was my own fault. It was all a mess and there was no way not to make it one. I wanted to talk to Mia again, but even if I saved her, that wouldn't happen. She hadn't deserved to die, so I could trade positions with her. I wouldn't even be doing it for some twisted form of recognition, as nobody would know what had happened. My other self would exist in my place and I'd step aside. I looked at the tower, knowing the Sekimeiya was inside. Who else in that town knew about what had happened on the 15th? I wished I could have known that. I just have to go in, find where the Sekimeiya is, and check if I can open a door in the storeroom. I just have to do that, determine what I can do, and enter again during the night. That wasn't the problem. I would only go back to the tower after knowing whether I truly wanted the past to change. So, would I attempt to alter the hellish world I'd experienced at the cost of the life I'd always had? Or would I give up on using the Sekimeiya again, accepting the cards we'd been dealt to create the best future we had at hand? Huh. Alright, well, I mean, you guys know what my decision is, clearly. So we'll try to change the past. And we'll see what the other option holds in store for us later. I would change the past. I had a way to save Mia, Atsuki, Isla, Kate, Naomi, Erina. I had travelled from the 15th to change the past alone, and even though I hadn't been aware of what would happen, I'd considered the outcome with my other self. Looking at the small town had finally brought me to lean toward an option. I decided to do my best to change the past, as the possible consequences didn't outweigh what good could be achieved. But the tower I could see far in the distance, I still couldn't go there. The day I'd enter that building again would likely be the last day of my normal life, and even though I'd decided, the thought could still freeze me in place. I wanted the days I had to persist, but that couldn't happen. My life in Yushibana was likely soon to end, and I could choose the length of the last stretch. If I saved Mia, I wouldn't show myself to her, Atsuki and the other me, even though I didn't know yet what I would do. So the issue to solve was the possibility of a knowledgeable enemy who could change the past on their own and steal the Sekimeiya before the 15th. I couldn't do much to combat that, aside from rushing in, which I despised the thought of. So I settled on another course of action and accepted that I would take it. Thursday was 2 days away. Every Thursday morning an event would be held in the tower. That was the day I'd chosen to step into the building for the second time, to find the Sekimeiya that was surely confined inside. I tried to breathe properly. If I wasn't beaten to it, I only had one more day that I'd chosen to give myself, hopelessly refusing to let them end so soon. And the very next one, I'd go to the tower in the morning and think about the best way to act. Then I'd put that into effect that very night. What would the event be? I knew Atsuki had read the upcoming ones and had said that only one seemed interesting in late January. There, people will probably ask about the Sekimeiya. It might even be held in the event room. We had bought entrance tickets for the 15th many days prior, but when we'd waited in the lobby, I'd heard people trying to buy them at the reception desk. They'd all been sold out, but if you could buy the tickets directly there, it must have been common to do so on the day of less important events. And if there are none left, I'll just pay for a normal visit. Joining whatever special event will happen isn't essential. I had to stop staring ahead. The strong wind kept whipping snow into my face, and prickling pains chipped at the corners of my eyes. Scanning the ground, I took the path that circled Yushibana. The way wasn't perfectly even, and traversing the dense snow was difficult. I had to take the next path leading down, but I couldn't easily see it in the distance due to its identical color. My stomach was demanding food, and the cold was becoming too prominent to bear. Protecting my head with my hood, I advanced steadily, knowing where I was headed for once. I must have been close to home. Even though I was going slow, I knew there wasn't much distance between both trails down. I'd been glancing up here and there, but it was hard to recognize the narrow entrance to Yushibana I was going toward. At last, I saw the absence of brown at my right. As I thought, it extended all the way down, leading to a dirt road close to my home. I stepped down the steep path, careful not to trip. Slowly, I descended until there was concrete below the snow and composed myself. The wind was noticeably weaker closer to the ground, so I raised my head again. The narrow path soon became a sidewalk where a couple of cars were parked. Like I'd seen from above, nobody seemed to be on the outskirts. I was less than 2 minutes away from home. My apartment was 1 block farther, but I had to walk a bit. Is someone behind me again? I could see the metallic staircase far ahead, but I debated whether to stop. No, yesterday that didn't work. They'll just run away. Should I pass by my apartment? What if they want to know where I live? I started to feel a little nervous. Had I actually felt someone behind me once more, or was it paranoia? I just needed to go home. I looked by my feet. I could circle this block, and if new footsteps are here when I'm back, I'll know I'm not making anything up. That's actually a smart idea. For once. I didn't change my pace, but I avoided even looking at my apartment. I just made a very important decision, but I felt indecisive again. Even if I confirmed that I'm right, what would I do? Ignore it? I'd have to go home anyway. Up ahead, the only way to see my back would be by being directly behind me. That means if I suddenly turn around at the end and someone is watching me, I should see them as well. I bit my lip and kept walking. I couldn't make any motions that indicated I thought someone was behind me or they'd be able to escape again. If someone was there, I just needed to know who it was. I managed to feel a bit of sweat forming on my palms despite the overwhelming cold. Depending on who it was, I might have had to act sooner than I expected. I had passed my apartment. If someone was really looking at me, would the curtain of snow conceal them? If they turned fast enough, identifying them might have been impossible. I was close to the end of the street where it curved into another one. If someone was watching me from behind at that moment, they had to be in eyeshot. But I instinctively turned around before I'd planned. A sudden sound had broken the silence far behind me, and as I'd feared, the falling snow was blurring the image. Frowning, I dashed the way I'd come, toward a blue smudge way ahead. Is that? It immediately became visible. It was a police officer. But that wasn't all, so I didn't stop. Before getting there, I understood what had happened. Next to the officer was a police car, and they just closed the back door after making someone else get in. Oh, what's wrong? I panted breathlessly, my hands on my knees. A sudden dizziness invaded me, almost causing me to fall. Are you okay? I nodded and slowly looked up. Instead of responding, I stared at the window of the car. The glass was tinted, so I couldn't see the interior of the vehicle. Sorry, did you just arrest someone? Yes, what's the matter? I was feeling like someone was following me just now. Could it have been this person? The man frowned and took out a tiny scrapbook. What's your name?
Mine? It's Shiria Mirana.
He looked at me and silently wrote on the paper. Then he suddenly smiled, completely shifting his expression. I see. You can stop worrying then. If you think you were being followed, there's nothing to be afraid of.
What? Can you let me see their face?
He looked at the black window. No, I'm not allowed to do that.
What about their name or the reason for arresting them?
You can stop worrying, believe me. Right now I'm not allowed to tell you any of that, but just wait for when it's made public. I tried to produce some way of coercing him into telling me more, but I couldn't come up with anything. I have to hurry. Don't hesitate to contact us if you feel you're being followed again, but I don't think you'll be having any more problems.
Okay.
The man nodded with a sympathetic smile and opened the door to the driver's side, quickly shutting it again. Then the car began to move and soon disappeared toward the way I'd just run from. I looked by my feet. The tire marks came from far away, and next to them was a group of footprints. These are mine. I looked at the ground earlier specifically for this. And these were definitely not here before. They're the policeman's though. I kept looking down, trying to find a third pair of footprints. There had to be a third pair right here, but I suddenly remembered the strange smile the man had. Something had felt odd about him. Wait, these. After taking a few steps forward, I noticed a trail of footprints coming from the same direction as the tire tracks. It must be these since they end where the car was. They also resemble the ones I saw yesterday. I kept following them in reverse, hoping they would lead somewhere. However, I immediately realized that wouldn't work. The more I walked, the more the footprints faded due to the falling snow. Soon, I could hardly even make out their shape. I was right. I stopped myself, stress and relief pulling me from both sides. The person who was following me was arrested. Maybe I was right that there was someone else who traveled from the 15th. Depending on what happened, just that alone could have led to their arrest. What mattered was that someone who could have wanted to steal the Sekimeiya was out of the picture. Being able to feel a little calm in that regard was immensely beneficial. And he said that their identity would be made public. When is that going to be though? Assuming everything up until the 15th repeats, it won't be before that day, right? Otherwise, someone who went up to the tower would have known a future self of theirs had been arrested. I didn't know what to think, but it seemed someone had really identified me and been following me. Added to their arrest, assuming that they traveled from the future seemed the most likely scenario. I turned around. My apartment was right there. I could barely keep myself standing anymore. I approached the staircase while I grabbed the keys and staggered my way to the front door. I lightly shook off the snow on me and turned the key clockwise. How long had the heater been on? The change in temperature was more drastic than it had ever been. I hurriedly closed the door and left my coat and boots behind. I wanted to drop to the floor, but I managed to make it to the kitchen. I knew I still had the instant noodles I'd bought, so I grabbed the bowl I'd used last time, then washed and filled the pot. Once the water began to boil, I dropped the noodles in and watched them slowly spread out. It would take 3 minutes to cook. Meanwhile, I sipped water and tried to compose myself. I hadn't been able to eat in the tower, and I'd kept going for hours and hours there, but the cold outside in wintertime Yoshibana was a real problem for me. I kept underestimating the importance of a reasonable surrounding temperature. Someone following me had only thrown me further into disarray. I couldn't put into words why I'd felt again that they'd been watching me, but it was possible their goal had really been to learn where I lived. I was far beyond the point of assuming they just wanted to confirm who I was. I removed most of the water from the pot and dropped the noodles in the bowl, garnishing it as I had before. The meal looked pretty ordinary, but I eagerly brought it to the living room. I ate some. They were hot and a bit stiff, but I kept going. I eventually slowed down. Curiously, I took out the phone from my purse and looked at the time. 4 PM already. I was outside for so many hours. The person who was just arrested, could they have been from Sin? If so, that must have been a new occurrence, because we were told that no members had been caught yet. Had it been someone I'd been with in the tower? It was frustrating that I hadn't been able to see their face. I figured there was no point in getting hung up on it, so I kept eating as I thought back on what was most important. It'll be Thursday in just 2 days. I'm giving myself tomorrow to enjoy, but I'm not sure that's what I want anymore. I'll probably just be nervous all day. On Thursday morning, finding the Sekimeiya and checking the door in the storeroom shouldn't take too long. After that, there are more important matters. I'll change the pass drastically for the first time by going to Atsuki's house and taking the entrance tickets we bought. Later, I can go to Isla's house and either attempt to talk with whoever her friend really is, or try to prevent them from going on the 15th in the same way. That could be really important, because if I get caught by the police or am not able to find the Sekimeiya, at least I'll guarantee that the four of us don't go to the event. I'm not too sure what would happen then. It's very likely the two initial groups to get trapped would merely consist of different people, but I can't do anything about that. I'd entirely cleaned out the bowl, so I brought it to the kitchen and picked up a pair of cereal bars. Then I had a thought I hadn't fully considered before. Could this be a bad idea? No. Assuming I'm not able to find the Sekimeiya in a tower, should I really try to prevent any of us from going there? That might screw it all up. Right now the 15th is the failsafe in case I can't find the Sekimeiya beforehand. If I let everything repeat, I'll be able to touch it again on that day. Hell, I could see where the recorder even came from, or even stay there for a month depending on whether it's real or not. But if Atsuki, Isla, Eren and I don't go to the event, it will all be considerably different. What if something causes the attack to fail? What if Kate and Ashi are able to unlock the exit this time? That would get rid of the only guaranteed time where getting the Sekimeiya again will be possible. So if I don't find it anywhere on Thursday, maybe waiting until the 15th is the best call. I rejected that idea at the start of all this for a reason. If I let the incident happen like it once did, where really is the proof that the past can change? It would mean that the version of myself Atsuki saw really was just me in the future. But that's not the case anymore. This is what I hadn't considered yet. If I don't change anything else until the 15th and everything actually repeats, I won't have to enter the tower again. Now I know something very important. At close to 4 PM, a very long travel took place and it reached through the walls of the tower. Could I place myself in that range? Would I be arrested? Even though everyone else close to the building will know that someone with my name is inside, would they recognize my face? All I'd have to do would be to spot Waisuda and get very close to him at 4 PM. That would make me travel to the 24th of November. This would be the best possible outcome. If I'd make it far enough to be the first person to find the Sekimeiya in the mountains, stop all of this at the source and save everyone. Exploring what to do those days seemed like a foolish dream, but I thought about it for a bit. I'd been living in my apartment on the 24th, so if I actually wanted to go that far back, I'd have to seriously plan it out. It sounded great in concept, but I couldn't help but feel very hesitant as well. How would I get close to Waisuda without getting arrested? I could call him again to more accurately determine the time he travelled, but it was unlikely it would be very precise. I still had no idea why we'd found 2 bodies of Naomi, but I hated the idea of letting that repeat. Even if I'd be letting it happen again so that I could stop it later. In addition, even though it seemed like a given, I couldn't assume that large travel would still happen. I didn't think Waisuda had lied, but I'd somewhat changed history when I'd called my mum, and I didn't know what extra changes that implied. Furthermore, someone else might have changed the past differently. The butterfly effect could have easily prevented the 4 PM travel from happening. If that was the case though, would the Waisuda I'd spoken to exist in the world I was in? While I couldn't answer that, I was inclined to think that he would, and that his travel would merely not repeat due to the change. I would concur. I opened my eyes after a while. I saw the familiar ceiling I'd been staring at before, but the illumination had slightly changed. Turning to the window, I noticed the sun was setting. I'd been going to sleep very early, so I was pretty tired. However, there was something that I had to do that I didn't want to leave for the next day. I'd been yawning and stretching on the floor, but I felt I had a bit of time before going to bed. Yawning, yes. Since doing it on Thursday might have been a bad idea, I stood up and went to the entrance. The sky had gotten a lot darker, and the icy air almost changed my mind. I quickly put my coat and boots back on, checked that everything was in my purse, and stepped out after turning off the lights. Snow was still falling, but it was much lighter, like in the morning. I wondered whether to turn back to grab an umbrella, but I didn't intend to be out for too long, and it didn't seem like the snow was picking up at all. I went down the stairs and began to walk. I looked at the ground where neither the tire tracks nor the footprints were visible anymore. It was remarkable how different the periphery was compared to the center of the town. After some minutes, I'd only seen a handful of people quietly wandering with an umbrella, but the many lit windows all around gave away the present life. I reached a lonely crosswalk leading to Ramon and saw the wide street ahead, illuminated by many faint streetlights. Home to many stores, it looked like an entrance to a different town, its whetstone occupied with passers-by. It's late, but I think it should be open. I walked up the path waiting for my destination to come into sight. While I'd never entered it, I recalled seeing it open at that hour. It should be that. Ahead and still in Ramon was what looked like a blue storefront with white letters above it. It read Ishimaru. I stood in front of its door. The interior was lit and a woman was sitting behind a transparent wall. Nonetheless, I felt a bit reluctant to step in. There was something about the situation that felt too surreal. I couldn't feel bad about myself though, because what I was doing was a necessary step. I pulled the door open and entered the small space, protected from the cold once more. The woman smiled warmly at me as I approached. Good afternoon. You'd like to try your luck? Yeah. Perfect. Have you come here before? I don't think you have. No, I have. I came a while ago, but I'd forgotten to check if I'd won anything until now. Ah, I see. What would you like then? I thought about how to phrase the few questions I had. The number I had was for December 1st, I believe. I wonder, by the way, how long would it be valid for? Oh, it's still valid, don't worry. They last a whole year. Anyway, December 1st, let me see. I hadn't been sure what day to say, but I hadn't wanted to ask for the previous days. If I went back to November, I changed the past in a considerable way. Then the butterfly effect could affect what I was doing. I knew each digit of a winning lottery number was manually drawn every time, so if I changed the past and made it back to the same day, it was very possible the latest winning number would differ. A mere millisecond of difference could have resulted in a different draw. I chose December 1st because it was the next day after Mia's death, and I didn't know how far back I'd end up being able to go. After looking at a computer screen for a few seconds, the woman voiced the number. December 1st, I'm assuming you bought a standard Lotus 6 combination, correct? Yes. On December 1st, the number drawn was 30, 05, 12, 31, 15, 26, and the bonus number was 24. It's a lot of numbers close together. I don't think that was it. It would have been great to win on the first attempt. Do you have the ticket? You might have won one of the secondary prizes if any of the last numbers coincide. I didn't bring it, no. I'm sure none matched, though. I see. That's unfortunate. Do you want to try again? Maybe. I have a couple of questions, though. I've always been curious about this. Would I be able to ask for a specific number that I want? Yes, that's possible. We tend to sell packs of 5 different combinations, but you can also choose the numbers you want if it's what you prefer. Alright. How much would I have won if all the digits had matched? Let me see. The main prize money of December 1st was 917 million yen. Well, 970,999,011 yen. So that's about 800 grand in euros, I think. It's even higher now. Nobody's won the jackpot in a while. Oh, wow. I'm not sure what I'd do with so much money. Some people say it's unlucky to win that much. It has ruined people's lives. Wait, I was wrong. It's not 800 grand. It's 8 million. Roughly. Yep, she's repeating the number in her head. Yeah, I would be very overwhelmed. I don't remember. How much does buying a number cost? It's just 200 yen. I see. Is it possible to buy a number that will be played the same day you buy it? Yes, but only before 5 PM. You don't have to worry about this today, though, since the next Lotus 6 will be held on the 5th, this Thursday. I understand. I think I'll come back, and I'd like to think about the number I want. That's perfectly fine. I hope you're right on the mark. Me too.
I'm sorry for having so many questions, but if I won, would my identity have to be revealed? Oh no, Japanese law doesn't enforce that. And how long would I have to wait to receive the money?
I actually looked it up just now. The yen's in trouble. It's fallen quite badly. It's, you know, that number you saw earlier? It's not even 6 million euros. It's fallen really badly. Oof. Okay.
No more than 2 weeks. You'd be able to choose whether to receive the full amount at once or monthly. You wouldn't have to worry about taxes either. Thank you. These questions had always been on my mind. I'm glad I could help. I'll see you next time.
I mean, 6 million is still plenty to live a whole life with, but, you know, I was expecting it to be more. I bowed and walked out. I began to walk down the street, repeating the numbers mentally. While writing them down might have been a good idea, I had to ensure I could memorize them, because it was very likely any written note would disappear if I traveled far to the past again, just like the knife had. I'll probably just get in big trouble. Within 2 weeks I'd receive the money in my bank account, so I'd probably have to take out the money before the enemy notices what happened. For that I'd have to duplicate my bank card or try to take it out of the enemy's purse. What would I do if I saw that so much money was added and immediately taken from my account? If it was investigated, security cameras would probably see me in the bank. Maybe not taking everything would be a good idea. If I leave a part for the enemy, would she keep quiet? She's bribing herself. I'm not sure what I would do myself in that situation, honestly. I could hardly take this thought seriously. Had I really assumed that I tried to go live far away all by myself? She also said that she'd never seen me there before. I suppose that means that there currently is no me that bought that number after having traveled to the past. Of course that will only happen when history is greatly altered, so it isn't the case yet. 30, 05, 12, 31, 15, 26, 24. I still felt a little unsure. Would the numbers stay the same if I changed the past even a little bit? On December 1st, I will already have changed the past. However, I guess that if I travel 2 days before the 30th, I'll be able to obtain the Sekimeiya myself and redo this in a way so that the past only changes when I buy the number. I guess the past wouldn't even have to change in that instance, since me buying the ticket wouldn't contradict anything I would have previously experienced. A bit of snow was still falling, but it was hard to see it without looking at the streetlights. Yawning as I went, I walked back over my own steps until I arrived at my apartment. I stepped in, leaving my coat and boots behind as usual. I thought of trying to eat something else, but I was too tired to bother, and nothing I had was appetizing anyway. I changed into the same nightwear and turned off the light in the entrance. I took a piece of paper and a pen out of a drawer. Just in case, I wrote down the winning combination. After that, I straightened up my blankets and buried myself underneath them, leaving my phone by the side of my bed. Mom hasn't tried to call me again. I wonder what happened with that. Once again, I found myself comfortably lying on my soft mattress while another version of myself was suffering in the hospital. I also felt bad for the me I was, who only had 2 last times to appreciate the touch of that old bed. What was it? I felt my head hurt a bit, but I tried to recall the winning combination before looking at the bedside table. 30, 05, 12, 31, 15, 26, 24. I'm pretty sure that was it. I felt like I'd only slept for the blink of an eye, as I vividly remembered the thoughts I'd had in the evening. I looked up, still covering my eyes with the bedsheets. I shuffled the blankets aside. I'd gotten too used to the feeling of waking up to a warm room. It was almost more pleasant than being covered in softness. I didn't want to spend a long time in bed, so I pushed myself to get up. I raised the blinds, filling the bedroom with light. Behind the glass was the still image of a white Yushibana with the sun already up. The snow had ceased during the night, and a bit of fog was all that remained, especially prominent in the distant mountains. It was a beautiful and peaceful thing to see, but I felt some deep strain as I remembered that I might not be able to view it for much longer. My phone showed 9:57. I had no plans for the day, but it was a very special one. Like usual, I stepped to the bathroom and rubbed my eyes. I still had 2 cereal bars left. I tossed the wrappers in the trash and started to eat them as I tiredly stretched my arms. I'd been nervously pacing as I ate them and stopped myself as soon as I realized it. I didn't have anything to do, and repeatedly going over the same thoughts was only stressful. I decided to spend my final free day in as relaxing of a manner as I could manage, but I couldn't let myself keep worrying about losing precious time. I went back to my bedroom and looked at the wardrobe to pick something to change into. I stared at what I had. I'd been selecting random clothes for the past few days, but I found myself thinking a little harder about it. I had a blue hoodie that I really liked in mind, but I couldn't find it, so I ended up grabbing a long-sleeved orange shirt instead. My laundry basket was nearly full. The previous day's clothes were there, and it had been a while since I'd washed them. Doing the laundry most certainly didn't matter anymore, but I dragged the basket to the kitchen nonetheless. The washing machine was there, next to another basket which was close to full. I tended to prioritize washing what I left in my bedroom, but I still had the blue hoodie in mind, so I rifled through both piles. I wasn't able to find it with a cursory inspection, but I didn't want to empty both baskets just for that, so I began to fill the washer. The machine wasn't too spacious, so I could only pick out part of the basket. Once I'd filled it with the top half, I pushed the round door shut and poured in a bit of laundry detergent. I had a number of clothes at home that I'd accumulated throughout the years, but since they were all on the cheap side, I didn't trust using hot water. When I pressed the big blue button, 30 minutes appeared in red digits on the screen and began to count down. I grabbed the lighter bucket and brought it back to my bedroom, where it was more convenient. I ended up sitting on the carpet. I was trying to calm my nerves, but as soon as I made any attempt to stop thinking, it became incredibly difficult. I wanted to go out again, somewhere. Staying still, the mess of emotions inside me was uncontrollable. Does it even matter though? I can go to Ina, but it's not fair to say goodbye to someone without them knowing it, and I'd just be so sad without being able to say why. Then the past would change and that would be overwritten anyway. I really tried to keep my mood pleasant. It was possible I wouldn't find the Sekimeiya the next day, and even after traveling I could go to Ina Cafe before the 30th to reach a time that wouldn't be deleted. The time had been passing far too fast, so I rested my head on a pillow, knowing that would slow it down. I stayed there for a few minutes and listened to the washer work. Even if doing the laundry didn't matter, my clothes could get moldy if they stayed inside for too long. I heard it running from the living room when the intensity increased. I knew the spin dry had begun and that only a few minutes were left. I stood up and walked to it. I could see the meshed clothes rapidly spinning behind the glass and the countdown approaching the last 3 minutes. I watched the seconds tick until 4 zeros filled the screen. Then I grabbed the plastic handle and opened the door. I placed the blue bucket below it and dropped the compact, wet mess of clothes in it. I dragged it to the wardrobe as well. I didn't have a dryer, so since the outside was freezing, I had to use a foldable washing line with the help of the heater. I made room on the floor and opened it up, proceeding to grab the pieces and hang them individually. They weren't too wet, so I kept crouching and using as few of my scarce clothes spins as possible. I took out a pretty blue and white shirt. I figured that I was still pretty tired since I thought I'd left it out of the washer due to the bad memories it brought, but I still hung it properly and kept going. I was done fairly shortly and looked at the neatly hung laundry that would likely never be used. I turned around looking down at my feet until I got to the front door. I'd been going outside without a defined reason and I felt obligated to do it again. Spending the entire day inside would have been too difficult. I got ready to leave and recalled I'd left my purse in my bedroom, so I went to grab it along with my phone. I was about to reach for the front door, but I walked to the kitchen instead, remembering the garbage bag where I'd thrown the cereal bar wrappers. It was almost full, so I made a knot with the bands and returned. I pushed away a bit of snow that had accumulated on the ground, just like most of the neighboring apartments had. The cold was still biting, but I'd come to expect it by that point. Stepping with satisfying crunches, I went down the stairs. The sky had cleared completely and the street seemed especially bright. I walked the opposite way as usual, toward the garbage bins. They were at the very end of the street, past the curve that could be seen in the distance. I threw the bag in the bin for combustibles and started to walk toward the center of Yishibana. As opposed to the previous day, my first view of Ramon was the crowded street it had always been. After crossing the road, I walked near the left buildings until I was on the thinner path. Of course, Ina was open. I saw the large screen of glass and Darcy behind the counter, seemingly texting with his phone. Oh, hey, I'm glad to see you've taken a liking to this place again.
Yeah.
I stepped up to the bar. Like the previous day, there was no one inside at that time. How are you?
I'm okay.
I must have looked a little worse than before. I figured he thought it was just due to Mia's death, but there was much more affecting me than solely that. Do you want one of these? He pointed at the pastries I'd been eating across the past couple of days.
Yeah, I'm hungry.
He grabbed a small plate from below the counter and placed it in front of me with a pastry. I bit into it, a little bit tired of eating the same thing repeatedly, but glad that I at least had the option. Going to sit at the same place again? I turned to the table he was pointing to. As I spun, something caught my eye. There was a TV close to the entrance. It was muted, but I could see a reporter speaking into a microphone. I recalled the words of the police officer.
I will, yeah.
I grabbed the plate and stepped back, but I sat on the opposite chair from last time so that I could see the screen. Would it be announced today? That seems unlikely. But as soon as I sat on the chair, I read the white text at the bottom of the screen, which had just changed from a different headline. Sin member caught for the first time yesterday in Yushibana.